You're listening to the Results Driven Organizations podcast with Dr. Tanya Lowe, a podcast of curated conversations with C-suite leaders and those who support organizational growth and development. Get ready for inspiring interviews, educational lessons, and thought-provoking discussions that will challenge you to execute something new and innovative that will drive results in your organization. And now, here's Dr. Tanya Lowe.
Hello, you're listening to the Results Driven Organizations podcast with Dr. Tanya Lowe. Using my results driven philosophy of strategy, leadership, teams, and customer experiences, I help organizations develop their best kept secret, their human capital. It's Women's History Month, and our guest today is Janae Robinson. Janae Robinson is a trailblazing figure embodying resilience, excellence, and an unwavering dedication to fostering inclusive spaces with the career-spanning industry giant like Facebook, which is now known as Meta, and Google, as well as innovative startups like Mio. Janae has consistently shattered glass ceilings. As the chief of staff for RHJ Consulting Group, she orchestrates strategic initiatives with precision and foresight. Janae's passion for diversity, equity, and inclusion permeates every endeavor she undertakes, from crafting impactful micro-learnings to moderating thought-provoking panel discussions and conferences. She catalyzes meaningful change. Her expertise spans critical topics such as intersectionality, colorism, and the unique experiences of first-generation and Black professionals in tech. A sought-after speaker, Janae has graced renowned platforms like Black at Microsoft, also known as BAM, and Women at Microsoft, WHAM, leaving an indelible mark with her insights. Her influence extends beyond boardrooms to prestigious events like the Essence Festival of Culture and the National Conference for the Association of Latino Professionals for America. She is a busy lady, proudly a two-time first-generation HBCU graduate of Houston Tilliston, I hope I said that right, Houston Tilliston University. Janae is driven by a commitment to authenticity and change. Janae, welcome to RDO.
Good morning. Good morning. First of all, I need that bio that you just read because I've never heard anybody read me like that. Okay. Yeah, you're gonna have to send that to me, and I'm gonna have to update my personal bio because you did it oh so well.
My team does a great job with the bios, and we will make sure that you get a copy of it.
Listen, we need people in our corner to help us continue to be great. And shout out to HBCU graduates that are on the call. So the pronunciation is Houston Tilliston University.
Tilliston,
and that's in Austin, Texas, the oldest and only institution of higher learning in HBCU in Austin, Texas.
Wow. Shout out. And I am also a HBCU alum myself. Yes, Clark Atlanta University.
Come on, Clark.
Yes. So I'm so excited to have this conversation. We've been talking, and today we're going to talk about intersectionality. It's Women's History Month, and I feel like this is a prime and powerful topic to have discussion to have, because when I mentioned the term, there are people that have I don't know, what does that mean? What is it? I said, well, you're gonna find out really soon. So before we just jump into the questions, will you define intersectionality for us and tell us why it's crucial to consider when addressing issues related to women at work and leadership?
Absolutely. So before I even do that, I'm going to, part of my intersections is being a God-fearing woman. Yes. So I have to just thank God for the opportunity to sit on this platform with you. I thank him for a purpose. We all have a purpose in life, and whether you ground, meditate, energies is your thing. For me, it's capital G-O-D. That is who I look to for all things purpose work. So I just thank him for sitting amongst another beautiful Black queen to talk about such an important conversation of intersectionality. The great thing is Professor Kimberly Crenshaw, she's the one who coined this term in 1989. So I can't even take credit for this. Another amazing queen who understood that intersectionality is about race, ethnicity, class, gender, sexual orientation, weight class, disabilities, religion, age, and all these characteristics that also intersect and overlap with each other and affect the experiences of marginalized individuals and groups. She gives this example that I always like to share. Think about identities, our traffic flow at an intersection. One identity flows from one direction and the other flowing in a different direction. So it's just a flow and in and out of different categories, different intersections, different characteristics and identities that go left, right, north, south, east, and west. That is the foundation of intersectionality.
Wow. Wow. So thank you for laying that groundwork of what it is. It's all of the pieces of how we show up. And it sounds like some of the pieces that we might leave at home.
Yes.
Like I can only show up with these pieces of who I am. So why is it important for women to why is this important for women in leadership?
That's a great question. And I love that you asked that, because part of when I facilitate my intersectionality workshop, it creates the space for women, for individuals. If you are a woman, non-binary, however you choose to identify as part of your intersections, to figure that out in a group discussion. This is why it's important. You just said the perfect example. Some of me shows up to work, or some of me shows up in certain social environments, or some of me shows up in my family environments. Sometimes the result of that is you are not being your true, authentic self. You are presenting a small narrative that does the other intersections and identities of you a disservice. In order to be one way to be a great leader is to show up unapologetically yourself. How do you do that? You have to know who you are. All of the characteristics of your intersections, your race, religion, gender, weight class, all of these things. Do you know what those things are? And I know this is a podcast and I'm trying not to get in workshop mode. But if those who are listening as we're having this dialogue can kind of just start jotting down these different layers of who we are, your gender, ethnicity, religion, disability, right? Disabilities are seen and unseen, weight class, sexual behavior, gender identity, socioeconomic status. These are all categories of identities that just make up who you are. Sometimes it's hard to be a strong, powerful, empathetic servant leader and leader in any space and environment. Sometimes it's hard to do that when you don't know who you are.
Wow.
And if you know who you are, do you show up unapologetic?
So let me jump in right here. We've been hearing for a few years, show up as your authentic self. Show up as your authentic self. But you have to do that groundwork. You have to,
Mhm.
yeah, who am I authentically,
Right.
not behaviorally? Who am I authentically when it comes to my intersectionalities? How my thought leadership, is it different? Because of where I grew up, I see the world differently. And so, is it safe for me to be authentic? Because I believe many women, I don't want to say hide, but maybe hide is the right word, Janae. Hide their intersectionalities because they feel like they have to fit into a mold. Has that been your experience? Have you heard other women talk about that?
Absolutely. So two things. One, I think hide is one word we can use.
Okay.
There are a plethora of words. And those listening, find out what word works for you in your lived
Mm,
experience. It could be fear.
yes.
It could be a trauma response because when I've expressed or shown up as myself, I was condemned. The space was not psychologically safe. And when we say space, whether it's corporate, societal, or family, family is that intracultural piece that is a whole separate conversation. So, whatever word that you want to use to figure out that why. And as for me, this is the season that I'm in. I don't know if anyone has been to those rooms where you can break glass and have a hammer and just break things. It's like an activity space
Mm-hmm.
where you can go in, they give you a hammer, and it's just a room that's been beat up, and people donate things to where you can break and release your anger. Imagine being in a room, and this is where I'm at, where I am disrupting, flipping tables,
Mm-hmm.
throwing glass because I have been conditioned to be put in a room, in a box. And I looked up around and I was unhappy. I
Mm.
walking around in spaces and didn't recognize who I was because I allowed external expectations to define and create this character that I did not give folks permission to design. And now I don't know who I am.
Yeah.
So I'm disrupting things. I'm in a space where I am dismantling and saying no to things that no longer serve the intersectional layers of who I am.
That's powerful. That's powerful. Ooh, so ladies, women, you're listening to this. I hope that you are jotting. We like instructions, so it's okay to give assignments during the during the podcast because I want whoever's listening to this to really take these things into account and look at, where am I holding myself back? What are the reasons that I feel it? Do I feel like I need to hide? Is it a trauma response? Is it out of fear? Is it, I don't feel like um, it'll put a halt on my career. Think about your intersectionalities and why you do or maybe you do not show up as your true authentic self. As we're having this conversation, and I think about women leaders, I think about when your leader shows up as their true authentic self, it allows the team to feel like this is a safe place for me to show up as my true authentic self. Can you speak to that?
Absolutely. Servant leadership is powerful. That's
Mm-hmm.
why I started off before this conversation with giving praises to God. And it may not be everyone to praise God,
Mm-hmm.
but I have to show up as me. So those who are looking for, okay, Dee, but I need the steps. You're saying all this great things,
Mm.
but this is how I learned. So here are the steps.
There's steps. Okay. Get your
This
pens
is
and pads.
this is what worked for me.
Mm.
One, I had to go ask my creator, who did you call me to be? Because I lost myself in these titles. I lost myself at the Facebook, at the Google, the startup tech company, and I lost myself a little bit at an HBCU campus because the status quo was different than my calling. So I had to seek God first and ask him for direction. The other part is therapy. Listen, therapy don't have to be you sitting in a room on a couch talking to somebody. What do you find solace that is therapeutic? I know someone who goes to the gun range as a form of therapy. I know someone who meditates and does sound baths, the form of therapy. So finding something that works for you that allows you to disconnect from your titles, your corporate titles, your mom titles, your sister, niece title, all of these labels, disconnect from them and find a space to where you can internally connect with who you are. The last part is I had to find a support group that was equally yoked or aligned with where I was trying to be. And that internal support group could be ERGs, employee resource groups. That can also look like community outside of corporate, whether it be a church or a social group within your city. There may be friends that you can connect with that is not in the social groups. You see how we have 3 different areas in which support can make sense. Therefore, to answer your question initially, you then can show up in this corporate space as a servant leader and lead by example, because outside of that corporate space, you've found communities that can help grow you to be yourself and create a space at work to where, despite what my manager has told me, despite the societal conditions, right? Intersectionality, just like Kimberly said, have been used against you for marginalized groups and experiences. So despite what society, politics, procedures have said, I'm going to show up as myself because I've done these things. I found my source, I found my community, and I found who I was outside of all of these titles.
Wow. Wow. It's a powerful exercise to go through. Women are so burnt out in the workplace. Women feel like they have to step outside of who they are, right? To excel or climb the corporate ladder, if you will. And I think that, really get a grasp of who am I? Who am I? Not who do you want me to be? And so we fall into this place of the chameleon. And I think that's why so many women get to a place in their lives where they say, I lost myself. I don't know who I am. I'm trying to find myself. But if you do it on the front end and you go back and you you give yourself a checkup, like, okay, where am I? Am I still moving toward my purpose? Maybe it'll help to not become so ingrained in all of these outside influences. So my next question, because we have to save something for the forum. Janae is going to join us for the March forum, where we will be talking about this. So we're going to save some of the goodies for that. But how can companies create inclusive and equitable environments that recognize and value the intersectional identities of women, fostering this culture of diversity and belonging? So we've talked a lot about what it is, what women can do to figure out why they show up or why they don't show up as their true, authentic self, embracing all of their intersectionalities. You've given us some steps. So now what can these organizations, now I know where I am, I'm planted strongly. What can the organization do to create a supportive environment?
I think that's $1 million question. and this is a safe space because I know you and I'm going to say it. If we knew the answer to that question, we wouldn't have jobs.
Mm.
I'm just going to be honest. If we knew the answer to that question, then the roles of diversity, equity, inclusion wouldn't be terminated right now.
Mm.
I understand that there is not a one size fit all to answer this question. So I encourage organizations and companies to hire a specialist to do an internal audit, because what works for company A may not work for company B. I think the foundation of the goals, of intersectionality, navigating on how to facilitate or work with a multicultural, multi-generational workplace can be the same foundation. But as we build on this, it's going to vary by each organization. So I encourage folks to hire a specialist. Now, for those who may say, well, we've done that. Well, we have folks internally who we've hired for that. I encourage you to hire, in addition, a third party, someone who has no dog in the fight.
Mm-hmm.
They don't benefit from a promotion. They don't benefit from the metrics. They have no dog in the fight. So bring a third party to the table. Why? For inclusivity. I may not feel comfortable going to the director of DEI to share a concern, inquiry that I have, or an experience that I have from work. If we bring in a third party source to facilitate, to build something specific and unique for the next 6 to 8 months, for the next year, because you might get a different result. You might find things out that you didn't know as a senior leader, as a positional leader, because you've brought in a third party source. Yes, ERGs are phenomenal. Absolutely. Yes, the Black History Month or Women's History Month or Pride Month festivities and food, and those are phenomenal.
Yes.
That's a complete sentence. You can also bring in a third party. That's that equitable piece, right? Well, equality, everybody, every group, every organization has this support group. That's equality. Equity is what I need and what Dr. Tanya need are two different things.
Right.
In order for us to feel psychologically safe and supportive at work. And the reason why I really got soft with this, because it's a very touchy and sensitive question. And I think there are a plethora of ways to get the answer. I don't even know if there's one right answer, but we've seen it done in the wrong way.
Wow. Wow. So with that being said, from your research, and you've worked in some renowned organizations, have you identified specific industries or sectors that are making notable strides in promoting intersectionality and gender equality in leadership roles? And what lessons can others learn from their successes?
I think that's another great question. And in full transparency, what I've learned through my experiences, the metrics look great on paper. But then you find yourself working in these companies and organizations, and the math is not mathing, Dr. Tanya. It's not making sense. I do not feel safe here. Or the marketing showed inclusivity, but when I showed up to work, it presented a false narrative. The marketing presented a false narrative to what is transpiring and occurring internally. I understand metrics are powerful, and I understand folks need logistics and metrics to have logic and reason to justify things. But as a Black woman, as a chocolate Black woman, as a chocolate Black woman who has natural hair, I just identified a lot of my intersections.
Mm-hmm.
Those metrics don't mean anything if I show up to work and I'm the only woman of color on my team. I'm the only woman of color on the floor that I'm on. And a micro invalidation occurs, a microaggression occurs, and I take the steps that are necessary to report said experiences, and gaslighting becomes the next stage in this process. And for those wondering, well, she didn't give us any metrics or anything like that. All I can do is share my lived experience.
Yeah.
Metrics are powerful. I know there's about 3% of Black women that make up women who work in tech spaces. There's a metric for you. 3%. But and I'm getting emotional because it just takes me back to how they tell us we should be proud to have these positions and we should be proud to navigate spaces that weren't designed for us.
Mm-hmm.
But as I'm proud to navigate, because I understand the representation that it has for my community and it has for those who genderly identify the same as me, but there's no support. I'm not psychologically safe.
Mm-hmm.
Then quite frankly, the metrics, they don't mean nothing to me.
Wow.
I've experienced it firsthand internally. And I'll take a pause there because I feel my Holy Ghost help coming and I'm trying to be respectful. So I'm going to take a pause there. Dr. Tanya, you go ahead and take it away.
Janae, I so appreciate your authenticity and I appreciate you sharing your experience and your lived experiences, because I know that there will be women listening to this episode who can relate. Many times it helps to know I'm not alone. I'm not crazy. I'm experiencing the same thing, right? And because it's interesting that you mentioned metrics, because my next question was going to be about metrics. How can organizations leverage the metrics? But I think it really goes back to what you said in the third question I asked, was doing an internal audit, do some listening sessions, and really take that data. Now you have data of what people really think and believe, and you don't have to be afraid of that data, right? That data is gold when people feel like they can share. And then if all of the responses are perfect, know that somebody's not feeling safe to share, because there's no organization that is perfect.
And if there is, let me know, because I'm applying today.
Right. We all want to be there, right?
And one thing quickly, just to touch base for the metrics could be there. Let's just talk about it. The metrics could be there.
Mm-hmm.
This is why intersectionality is so important, because when we talk about metrics, we just by default, we just think gender, ethnicity. These are all external aspects, right? This is why it's valuable to bring a third party for inclusivity. You bring in a third party or company, a third party agency, a third party consulting group, because if the metrics are there, that may not mean the space is safe. It may not mean that there is a psychologically safe environment, because folks don't feel safe to report certain things because of retaliation, judgment, or here she goes again. She's hard to work with. Yeah. She's always complaining. She's always, my favorite word, this is sarcasm, she's given pushback. So when you bring in a third party to do an internal audit, it creates the space for you to figure out, what's really happening amongst that rug, what's really going on behind closed doors, because people feel safe to speak up.
Yeah.
And then you have this agency to then tailor a specific rubric for the organization that will be able to show folks we thought we had it, but we missed the mark in these areas. And that's okay.
Yeah.
You have to release the thought that perfection looks a certain way. And this, before I close out, is powerful. This is for me. This may sound a little cuckoo, a little crazy, or that don't make sense, Janae. I was rocking with you until you said this. But what worked for me is figuring out what my non-negotiables were as an employee.
Oh, that's powerful. Yeah.
Helped me discern what I was going to tolerate and what I was not going to tolerate. Now, I don't care how much that salary, that bag, we're in a culture where that bag is everything. I don't care how much that bag is. Mind you, my intersections are, I'm a single woman. I don't have children. I don't have major responsibilities. So I know that there is a privilege of those intersections of, I will walk away from a six-figure plus salary if I can't show up as myself.
Yeah.
Period.
That's character and integrity, and kind of going back to where we first started the conversation. Who am I? And I believe that as we look at who we are, we have to identify our non-negotiables. I've not heard it put that way, but we have to identify our non-negotiables. That's going to help us with our self-care. It's going to help us stay authentic to ourselves. It's going to allow us to show up in as our whole self, not just half of who we are. So I love that. Janae, I want you to speak to leaders right now, any leader listening to this conversation. They are a decision maker in the organization. What do you want them to take away from this conversation?
That's powerful. Ooh. As I'm thinking, because I'm not going to be politically correct, and I have to.
You don't have to be. You don't have to be in this space. This is a safe space.
Yes. My question really would be, what are the intentions? What is the goal? Because if we lead for self-gratification, we can lose sight of those around us. This is no shade. This is not a shade. This is not a slug. That's why it's important to know what's the intention. What's the goal? If the goal is to hit these metrics, to check off these boxes, please do that. If the goal, because I'm not here to tell anybody not to be who they are. If the goal is to show empathy and sympathy and make human connections, please do that. But I encourage you to make those intentions clear when you're leading people. Because when you are leading folks who learn differently, who receive information in different ways, you have to understand how you lead them impacts them from a corporate professional aspect and what it does to them personally. If we are encouraging people to show up as their authentic self, we have to understand how leading them impacts their authenticity. So share with people the type of leader that you are. Maybe then they can adjust themselves, not code switching. Please don't misunderstand me. Not code switching. It's so that they know, okay, maybe when I have a family issue, maybe when I have a personal concern, this leader isn't who I go to express specific things and that I'm going through. Part one. Part two is being a leader has more impact than the ebbs and flows of what we've been trained to believe. We don't realize how much folks seek us for guidance.
Yes.
I understand somebody could be thinking, well, I'm not going to micromanage. We're not saying I'm not saying micromanage, but I challenge you, I encourage you to remove the surface level robotic conditioned tendencies of these dialogues. How was your day? The weather was really nice this weekend.
Mm-hmm.
Or the first aspects of the meeting, the first 2 to 3 minutes of a meeting is just surface level checking in and then going right into the agenda. I encourage you to have intentional one-on-ones where you don't talk about work,
Mm-hmm.
but also respecting people based off their intersections where they don't bring personal to work.
Mm-hmm.
That's okay.
That's okay. That's okay. And it's not that they're carrying a chip on their shoulder, which is something that I used to hear when I was in the workplace. Um, and understanding that people are raised differently, and there are people that just want to come to work and do their jobs. I think that that is becoming more acceptable than I have to show up and play this game. You mentioned code switching.
Mm-hmm.
For people who may not be familiar with that term, will you define that for folks? Because I think that's very important. I think it's very important as we have this conversation of intersectionality and as, leaders show up and share who they are, then as women, sometimes we can adjust, but not code switch. So can you speak to that a little bit? Because I think that's a key element.
Yes. So code switching is basically altering or adjusting your language, dialect, tone, personality to fit a space probably that wasn't designed and or created for you.
Mm-hmm.
I will give an example. um, Growing up as a Black woman, as a military child, never been raised in the projects or hood, being raised upper middle class. I've always been told that I act white, talk white, or I'm an Oreo. This is from the intercultural piece, right? From my own community. So equating, for example, education with white privilege or being educated means you are trying to be a race, a specific race, is part of what society puts on us as a culture and what we do to ourselves. So if I showed up to work like this, good morning, how are you doing? Hear how the tone in which has changed? That's authentically who I am.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm also, girl, let me tell you what. Let me tell you how my day went today.
Yes. Some
Folks may say, well, that's code switching. Why can't you be like, girl, at work too? We have to differentiate, right? Professionalism. I personally don't believe that there is a quote code switching form of professionalism, right? In the aspect of when I come to work, I know if I'm in a meeting, I will say girl, and some folks who don't identify as a race as me will chuckle, think it's funny, but sometimes girl was the only word that I needed to use to describe what I was feeling.
Girl.
Girl, let me
Girl.
like y'all, let me tell you. So just reeling it back into code switching, it's basically just altering yourself, language, tone, dialect, in different environments. And it's not the chameleon aspect. It's not adapt. It's changing your persona, changing who you are, because the thought of lack of acceptance, right? And if we think historically, we had to whitewash ourselves, right, to fit in. We had to straighten our hair because the American standard of beauty was long, flowy hair. Certain cultures, maybe you bleach your skin because you want to be lighter complected. Like, to me, these are all different variations of a form of code switching. I think it's important to not do that. I just bought Tabitha Brown's shirt that says freedom over code switching. Yeah, that's not a marketing plug at all. She does not pay me. However, I encourage everybody to go get that freedom over code switching. I wish I had an example from a different culture, right? Because if there are people on here, if you reach out to Dr. Tanya or myself and you don't identify within the BIPOC community, what forms of code switching and how does it show up in your community? I would really love to know that from a different lived experience, because is code switching only talked about in the BIPOC community?
Wow.
Does it show up in other communities? And if it does, what does that look like?
That's definitely something we can talk about at the forum.
That's good.
Well, yeah. Well, and I'll try to do a yeah. Okay. We're coming up with another episode and another forum all together. Last question. So you've spoken to the leaders. You've spoken to the leaders. Now, I want you to speak to that aspiring leader, that woman. What advice would you give her navigating her intersectionality in the workplace? And what can she do to overcome challenges as a leader?
You own one today, and I love it. These are powerful questions. So I'm gonna come from Mark 8:36. For what does it profit a man to gain the whole world and lose his soul? Yeah, hallelujah. I hear my I lead with that because that's where I'm at. Let's say you get everything that you desire, but lose yourself. You have to ask yourself, is it worth it? So the advice is, it goes back to the non-negotiables. Let me back up. You have to be willing to stand alone for what you feel is morally right. And you have to be willing to walk away for what you feel is morally wrong. And depending on who you are, that's going to hit different for different folks. If we stop code switching, if we stop compromising our authenticity, we would really be able to see what it's like to maneuver and be ourselves in a corporate space. We really would. But if we keep compromising and we keep waiting, we'll never know the right way to lead and to be of service for a multicultural, multi-generational place where it creates for folks to be authentic. We'll never know because we aren't showing up as so. I know that that's such a different type of response, but I'm only sharing my lived experience.
Yeah, that it's a valuable response. It's a response that I wish 30 years ago, this conversation could have helped so many women not become stressed, not think it's me, not try to fit into an organization and stay there for years and years and years, trying to fit and they'll never fit, trying to become something that's going to make them become accepted. I think it's It is good advice. And I think the way you just said it, it's going to affect you or hit you in a different way, depending on where you are in your career. If you're just starting your career, if you know where you are personally, which goes back to the assignment of what are your intersectionalities and what steps do you need to take?
And I'll add one thing for the folks who want steps. Come on, D, give me some more steps. Let me ask this hypothetical, because it's not going to be easy. What the advice that I'm providing just from my lived experience, that doesn't mean I don't have days where I'm stressed out, or I don't have days where I've become overwhelmed. I don't have days where I've wept. That's not what that means. If you are stressed or you need a mental health day, I'm not saying do this, but this is how you know. Ask for a mental health day. Take a day off. If you get anxious and anxiety starts to stir up, you feel like you have to go through so many scenarios on what your boss, manager is going to say. If you feel like, oh my God, they're not going to approve this, you may not be in the right organization. But that's for you to decide, because what I'm willing to walk away from may not be the same thing you're willing to walk away from. And at 30 years old, I never thought I'd say that, because we're conditioned. Don't you dare quit a job without having another job.
Yeah.
Don't do that. Are you going to leave a 6-figure plus salary role because you couldn't take a mental health day? Absolutely. Because if I'm pouring from an empty cup, I cannot do my job. If I'm at work and I'm dealing with microaggressions, gaslighting, all the isms of diversity and inclusion, then I'm doing myself a disservice.
Yeah.
So my advice, the steps is take a mental health day when you need it. Do something that is not doesn't go against policy, but is kind of frowned upon, like that unlimited PTO. This is no shade, but that unlimited PTO, go ahead and take that PTO and really be offline and be out of office. Don't check that email. If it stirs up additional follow-up questions that are going to stress you out, you may not be in the right place.
If you're getting sick on Sunday night before it's time to go to work on Monday, you might not be in the right place.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there's no, here's the answer for it. That's soul searching and coming up with a solution that's going to save you. And the people that are watching you, because people are always watching. What are you showing them? Final question. Janae, what are you reading that we should be reading?
Ooh. So I prefer, I'm a documentary person.
Okay.
So I love a good documentary. I am not a podcast person. So right now, it just aligns with my intersections. I am binge watching The Chosen.
Okay.
On, what channel? What streaming network is that? Amazon Prime. And it's helping me find my non-negotiables. It all ties back to, who am I? What have I been called to do? Where have I been called to serve? And what identities did I inherit without my permission that was given to me by folks that I no longer serve, or they are no longer in my life?
Adding that to my must-watch list. I hope you enjoyed this episode. We've been chatting with Janae Robinson, Chief of Staff, Speaker, Trailblazer. Visit the show notes to see how to connect with Janae. Be sure to grab a copy of Results Driven Organizations, the 4 Keys to a High Performance Workplace. You can use the link in the show notes and grab our special gift to you for being a valuable listener.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Results Driven Organizations podcast with Dr. Tanya Lowe. Be sure to review the show notes for the resources mentioned, and don't forget to grab your free gift available at freegiftfromtanya.com. Until next time.